My name is Claire, and this is how my mom and dad rolled their eyes when I walked into the courtroom. But the judge was surprised, became the turning point of my life. I can still see their faces when I push through those heavy oak doors. My mother's perfectly manicured hand rose to her temple in that familiar gesture of theatrical disappointment. My father didn't even look up from his phone, just shook his head like I was late to Sunday brunch instead of fighting for my future. But Judge Morrison? Her eyes sharpened with interest the moment I stepped forward with my banker's box full of evidence. She leaned forward in her chair, pen already poised above her notepad. Have you ever been invisible to the people who are supposed to see you most clearly? Let me back up. I was the mistake child. Not literally unplanned, but certainly unwanted in the way that matters. My parents, Richard and Diane Harper, had perfected their family portrait by the time I came along. Golden boy Marcus, magna cum laude from Yale, already making partner track at a prestigious law firm by 28, and my sister Vanessa, married to old money, producing grandchildren on schedule, hosting charity galas in the Hamptons. Then there was me, the third child they'd had during what my mother once called, after too much wine, a moment of nostalgic weakness. I was 26 when everything fell apart, working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Boston, living in a cramped studio apartment in Allston, and pouring every spare moment into night classes for my CPA certification. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't a disappointment either, just aggressively ordinary in a family that measured worth in prestige and zeros on a paycheck. My grandmother, Dorothy Harper, was different. She was my father's mother, a woman who'd built a small real estate empire in the 70s and 80s through sheer grit and intelligence when women weren't supposed to do such things. While my parents sneered at my studio apartment and sensible sedan, Grandma Dot would visit me, sit on my thrift store couch, and tell me stories about starting with nothing. She was the only one who ever asked about my actual life. Not just the highlights reel version my parents wanted to hear at Christmas dinner. When she died suddenly of a stroke at 79, I felt like I'd lost the only person who'd ever truly seen me. The funeral was a performance. My mother wore Chanel and dabbed at dry eyes. Marcus gave a eulogy he'd clearly prepared with ChatGPT, full of generic platitudes. Vanessa posted Instagram stories from the reception, black dress and all, with a caption about celebrating a life well lived, followed by a heart emoji. I stood in the back, genuinely grieving, watching my family treat her death like a networking event. 3 weeks later, Marcus called a family meeting at my parents' house in Wellesley. I almost didn't go. These meetings were usually just opportunities for my family to remind me of my inadequacies while discussing important family matters that rarely involved me. But something in Marcus's voice on the phone, a strange tightness, made me curious. I arrived to find them already seated in the formal living room, the one we were never allowed to play in as children. Coffee service laid out on the antique table. Marcus in his Tom Ford suit, Vanessa in Burberry. My parents flanking them like bookends of disappointment. "Claire, good of you to make it," my father said, checking his Rolex as if I was late. I was 5 minutes early. Marcus cleared his throat, every inch the lawyer. "We need to discuss Mother's estate." I blinked. "You mean Grandma Dot?" "Obviously." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "The will was read yesterday. You would have known that if you bothered to stay connected." I hadn't been invited to the reading. I said nothing. Marcus pulled out a leather portfolio. "The estate is substantial. The properties alone are worth approximately $8 million, plus investment accounts and liquid assets. It's being distributed according to her wishes, but there are some complications." My mother leaned forward. "Claire, your grandmother made some very unexpected decisions in her final years. Hams. Decisions that frankly suggest she may not have been of sound mind." "What are you talking about?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "She left you everything." The room went silent. I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel, each second stretching out like taffy. "What?" "The house, the rental properties, the accounts, all of it. to you. Marcus's voice was cold, clinical. With a few small exceptions for charity, you're the sole beneficiary. I couldn't breathe. $8 million. Property, security, freedom. Grandma Dot had seen me, really seen me, even in death. She was telling me I mattered. That's impossible, I whispered. Why would she? Exactly, my father interrupted. Why would she? You barely visited her. I visited her every Sunday. For money, clearly. Vanessa's voice was acid. You must have manipulated her, influenced her when she was vulnerable. I never asked her for anything. Well, you're not getting it. Marcus closed his portfolio with a sharp snap. We're contesting the will. Mother wasn't in her right mind. Early dementia, clearly. We have medical experts who will testify to that. She didn't have dementia. She was sharp until the day she died. My mother's laugh was cruel. Claire, sweetie, no one is going to believe she wanted to leave everything to you instead of her accomplished grandchildren. It's absurd on its face. That's when I understood. This wasn't about the money, not really. This was about the fact that Dorothy Harper, matriarch and self-made woman, had looked at her 3 grandchildren and chosen me, the invisible one, the disappointment, and my family would rather burn it all down than let that stand. I'm not giving up what she left me. Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Then we'll see you in court. Fair warning, I'm very good at what I do, and you can't afford representation that comes close to mine. Save yourself the embarrassment and sign the settlement papers. We're offering you $50,000 in a family piece. Take it. $50,000 out of $8 million. Less than 1%. Hush money to stay invisible. I left that house shaking with rage and grief and something else, determination. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went to the public library. I spent 8 hours reading Massachusetts probate law, printing articles, making notes. I couldn't afford a lawyer like Marcus, but I understood numbers and I understood research. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. The first hearing was a disaster. Marcus had hired a powerhouse firm, 3 lawyers in total, with medical experts and financial analysts. They painted a picture of me as a gold-digging opportunist who'd isolated a vulnerable old woman and poisoned her mind against her real family. They had a psychiatrist who testified that leaving everything to the least successful grandchild was, in itself, evidence of diminished capacity. I sat alone at my table with my handwritten notes pro se, representing myself because I'd called 8 lawyers and none would take the case on contingency against my brother. The judge, a tired-looking man named Brennan, clearly felt sorry for me, but seemed ready to rule in their favor. Marcus's lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen with a reputation for destroying opponents, circled me like a shark during cross-examination. Miss Harper, how many times did you ask your grandmother for money? I never asked her for money. Never? Not for rent, not for tuition, not for anything? Never. She smiled, sharp and cold. That's interesting, because we have bank records showing multiple transfers from Dorothy Harper's account to yours over the past 2 years. Thousands of dollars. Would you like to revise your answer? My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about those transfers. She insisted on helping with my CPA classes. I didn't ask. She offered. How convenient. An old woman offers you money, you take it, and now you claim you never asked. Patricia turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is a clear pattern of financial exploitation. It wasn't like that. How much did those transfers total, Miss Harper? I don't know exactly. $12,800 over 22 months. You took nearly $13,000 from an elderly woman, and now you want millions more. That's not inheritance, Your Honor. That's a con. I felt myself shrinking in my chair, becoming invisible again, the way Marcus smirked from his table, the way Vanessa whispered something to my mother, both of them laughing quietly. I was losing, and they knew it. Miss Harper, Judge Brennan said wearily during closing arguments, do you have any evidence beyond your own testimony that your grandmother intended this? Distribution? Any documents, recordings, witnesses who can speak to her mental state and decision-making process? I didn't. All I had was Sunday afternoon memories and the truth, which apparently wasn't enough. The court will take this under advisement, Judge Brennan said. But I'll be frank with you, Miss Harper. Without corroborating evidence, I'm inclined to find that the distribution was the result of undue influence at minimum, possibly diminished capacity. I'll issue a ruling in 2 weeks. Judge Brennan continued the case for 2 weeks to review evidence. I knew what that meant. I was losing. Walking out of that courthouse, Marcus caught up with me on the steps. He was alone, his legal team having peeled off to their expensive cars. Claire, wait. I stopped, surprised. He actually looked uncomfortable. Look, this doesn't have to get uglier. You fought hard in there. Dad was impressed, actually. Said you had more spine than he expected. He pulled out an envelope. We're revising our offer. $250,000. That's life-changing money for you. Take it, sign the papers, we can all move on. $250,000. 6 months ago, that would have seemed like winning the lottery. It would pay off my student loans, buy me a real apartment, give me security I'd never had. Plus, Marcus continued, you keep your relationship with the family. Mom's already planning Thanksgiving. Vanessa's pregnant with number 3. You don't want to miss out on being Aunt Claire, do you? That's what broke me. Not the money, but the manipulation. The dangling of acceptance I'd craved my whole life, conditional on making myself small one more time. She left it to me, Marcus. She was sick. She wasn't sick. She was the clearest thinking person I've ever known, and she chose me. Why can't you accept that? His face hardened. Because it doesn't make sense, Claire. You're not successful. You're not accomplished. You're barely keeping your head above water in some nobody job. Why would she give everything to you instead of people who've actually made something of themselves? There it was. The truth underneath everything. I wasn't good enough for my family's love, so I couldn't possibly be good enough for my grandmother's inheritance. Go to hell, Marcus. I walked away while he called after me about regrets and poor decisions. I walked 15 blocks back to my apartment because I couldn't afford an Uber and I'd taken the train to save money. I walked in my uncomfortable court shoes until my feet blistered, and I cried the whole way. Judge Brennan continued the case for 2 weeks to review evidence. I knew what that meant. I was losing. That night, I sat in my grandmother's house. The executor had given me a key while the estate was in probate. I walked through rooms full of her things, touching surfaces she'd touched, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I started looking. If Grandma Dot had wanted me to have this, she must have known my family would fight. She must have known I'd need more than just her word. She was too smart not to have left me something. I searched for 3 days straight, calling in more sick days I couldn't afford. I went through files, boxes, photo albums. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed the old roll-top desk in her bedroom had a weird gap between the back panel and the drawer depth. It took me an hour to find the hidden release. When the false back popped open, I found a fireproof box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters Grandma Dot had written to me over the past 2 years, dated and sealed but never sent. Letters explaining her decision in her own words, sharp and clear and undeniably competent. Letters detailing conversations with my parents, where they'd asked her for money for Vanessa's 3rd vacation home, for Marcus's boat, always taking, never visiting unless they wanted something. Letters describing Sunday afternoons with me, where we talked about books and business and dreams, and at the bottom, a DVD labeled "For Claire, if they give you trouble." I watched it on her old laptop. The recording was dated 6 months before her death. Grandma Dot sat in her living room, looking directly at the camera, and spoke for 20 minutes. She explained her reasoning with the precision of the businesswoman she'd been. She discussed her other grandchildren with love but disappointment, noting how they'd become their parents' children, seeing people as assets to be managed. She talked about me, about potential she saw that I couldn't see in myself yet. She even addressed the challenge to her will directly. If you're watching this, Claire, it means they're fighting you. I expected they would. Let this be my final lesson to you. Never let people make you small to make themselves comfortable. You fight. You hear me? You fight. I spent the next week preparing differently. I stopped trying to be a lawyer and started being an accountant. I created spreadsheets. I tracked every visit I'd made to Grandma Dot's house using my phone's location history, cross-referenced with her calendar that I'd found in her desk. I documented every financial transaction between us with receipts and context. I built a timeline showing that while I visited weekly, my siblings visited maybe 4 times a year, always around birthdays or holidays, always asking for something. I also did something risky. I hired a private investigator named Tom Chen for $2,000 I couldn't afford. I gave him one job: find out if there was any evidence my siblings had pressured Grandma Dot for money. Tom called me 4 days later. "You're going to want to see this." He'd pulled property records, Vanessa's third vacation home, the one she'd bought 18 months ago, down payment of $300,000, wire transfer from Dorothy Harper's account, Marcus's boat, $250,000, same source, my parents' investment in a tech startup that went nowhere, $500,000 gift from my grandmother after persistent pressure that Tom had uncovered through email records from Grandma Dot's cloud backup. Over $1 million to my family in 3 years. They'd been bleeding her dry while calling me the gold digger. The next hearing was scheduled before Judge Morrison, a transfer because Judge Brennan had a conflict. I'd heard she was tough but fair, a former public defender who'd seen every manipulation tactic in existence. I filed the letters, the video, and my new financial analysis as evidence 3 days before the hearing, the deadline. The financial records showing my family's gifts were the nuclear option. I filed a motion to include them as evidence of their real motivation for contesting the will. Marcus tried to get everything excluded. He filed emergency motions. He claimed the emails were obtained illegally, even though they were from Grandma Dot's own accounts, and I had executor access. He argued the financial records were irrelevant. He fought like a cornered animal because he knew what this meant. Judge Morrison allowed it all, every piece. I could see the panic in his eyes during the preliminary conference call when the judge denied his motions. I could hear it in his voice when he offered me one final settlement: $500,000 and mutual non-disclosure agreements. "Think about it, Claire," he said on that call. $500,000 and we all walk away. No more court dates, no more legal fees, no more family drama. You sign the NDA, we sign the NDA, and this never gets uglier than it already is. What are you afraid of, Marcus? What's in those emails that you don't want on the record? He hung up. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen at 2 in the morning, drinking tea from her favorite mug, and I talked to her like she was still there. "I'm scared," I whispered to the empty room. "What if I lose? What if all of this was for nothing?" My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't you dare give up. She believed in you. Tom." My private investigator had become my cheerleader. I laughed through tears and finished my tea. Judge Morrison allowed them. I could see the panic in his eyes when he realized I wasn't rolling over. The courtroom was fuller this time. My parents came, probably to watch me fail one final time. Vanessa sat beside them, scrolling through her phone like she had better places to be. When I walked in with my banker's box full of carefully organized evidence, my mother did that eye roll. My father shook his head without looking up. They'd already dismissed me. But Judge Morrison sat forward, interested. She'd reviewed the video, she'd read the letters. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Marcus's lawyers tried everything. They attacked the authenticity of the letters. They questioned the video. They brought back their psychiatric expert who droned on about late-life cognitive changes and susceptibility to manipulation. Then Patricia Chen stood up for what she thought would be her killing blow. "Your Honor, Miss Harper has submitted financial records supposedly showing gifts from Mrs. Harper to other family members. But these so-called gifts were investments in her grandchildren's futures. Mrs. Harper was a businesswoman. She understood strategic financial planning." What she didn't understand, apparently in her final years, was that giving millions to an underachieving granddaughter wasn't an investment. It was a mistake. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you arguing," the judge said slowly, "that giving money to successful family members was rational business, but giving money to a less financially successful family member was evidence of incompetence?" Patricia realized her mistake immediately. "No, Your Honor. I'm simply saying, you're saying that wealth should flow to wealth, that supporting a struggling family member is irrational. Is that your position?" "I'm saying the distribution was disproportionate and illogical." "Based on what? Your client's belief that they deserved it more?" Judge Morrison's voice was sharp now. "Counsel, I've read Mrs. Harper's letters. She explicitly states that she's giving to the granddaughter who needs it most and who spent time with her not for money, but for relationship. That's not incompetence. That's clarity of values." Patricia sat down, and I saw Marcus grip the edge of the table, knuckles white. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Morrison nodded. I didn't have fancy legal training. I didn't have prepared remarks. I just told the truth. I talked about Sunday afternoons, about how Grandma Dot would quiz me on real estate principles, teaching me what she'd learned over 50 years, about how she'd made me executor of her small charitable trust 2 years before she died, testing my judgment, watching how I handled responsibility, about how she'd opened a joint account with me a year before her death, not because I asked, but because she wanted to teach me about investment strategy. "My brother says she wasn't in her right mind," I said, looking directly at Marcus. "But the truth is, she was in her right mind for the first time in years. She finally stopped pretending that success meant prestige. She saw what actually mattered. She saw who actually cared." I played portions of the video. Grandma Dot's voice filled the courtroom, clear and sharp and utterly competent. She spoke directly to the camera about her decision, about watching her other grandchildren become entitled and transactional, about seeing potential in me that no one else bothered to look for. "I'm giving everything to Claire because she's the only one who visited me without wanting something. Because she's the only one who asked about my life, not my money. Because she reminds me of myself at her age, underestimated, hungry, and smart enough to prove everyone wrong." Marcus objected twice during the video. Judge Morrison overruled him both times. By the end, even Patricia Chen looked uncomfortable. Then I presented my financial analysis. The spreadsheet showing visit patterns, the documentation of the $1 million+ my family had taken from Grandma Dot, the emails showing the pressure and manipulation. I ended with one email that Tom had found, sent from my father to Grandma Dot 6 months before she died. "Mother, you've always been generous with Marcus and Vanessa. It's time to help them secure their futures. Surely you don't want your legacy squandered on Claire's mediocre life. She'll just waste it." The courtroom was silent. My mother had gone pale. Vanessa was staring at her lap. My father looked like he wanted to disappear. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "my grandmother didn't have diminished capacity. She had perfect clarity. She saw exactly who her family had become, and she made a choice. Not the choice they wanted, but the choice that mattered to her. All I'm asking is that you honor that choice." When I finished, I was exhausted. I'd given everything I had. Judge Morrison took a week to rule. Those 7 days were agony. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything else. The final hearing was short. Judge Morrison entered, and I stood with my heart hammering. "I've reviewed all the evidence," she began, "including the video testimony, the letters, and the financial records Miss Harper submitted, showing a pattern of joint financial planning between the decedent and the petitioner. I've also reviewed the evidence of alleged diminished capacity." She paused, looking at my family. "The evidence of diminished capacity is thin at best. It amounts to, 'I don't like this decision, therefore it must be wrong.' That's not how the law works. Dorothy Harper was a brilliant businesswoman who built substantial wealth through intelligence and hard work. The notion that she couldn't decide how to distribute that wealth is insulting to her memory." My brother's face went red. "Furthermore, the video evidence is compelling. Mrs. Harper clearly articulated her reasoning, her values, and her wishes. She anticipated this exact challenge and left detailed contemporaneous documentation of her mental state and decision-making process. That's not the behavior of someone with diminished capacity. That's the behavior of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Judge Morrison looked at me. "The will stands as written. The estate goes to Claire Harper." The sound that came from my mother was somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. Vanessa's phone clattered to the floor. Marcus was already packing his briefcase, jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. My father finally looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something like respect in his eyes, mixed with bewilderment, as if he couldn't quite understand how the invisible child had beaten his golden boy. "There is one more thing," Judge Morrison added. "Mr. Harper, as an officer of the court, you should have known this challenge was frivolous. You wasted court resources with what amounts to a family squabble motivated by entitlement rather than legitimate legal concern. I'm sanctioning your firm $10,000, payable to the court." Marcus's face went white. I walked out of that courtroom with my banker's box and my grandmother's legacy. My family left separately, not speaking to each other, certainly not to me. That was 8 months ago. I quit my job. Not immediately, but after I'd taken a month to grieve properly, to process everything, to sit in Grandma Dot's house and really understand what she'd given me. Then I gave proper notice, trained my replacement, and left on good terms. I kept 3 of the rental properties and sold the rest, investing the proceeds in a diverse portfolio just like Grandma Dot taught me. I renovated her house and moved in, surrounding myself with her books and her memories and her belief in me. I finished my CPA certification. I started a small accounting firm specializing in helping women entrepreneurs, especially older women who get dismissed by traditional firms. My parents haven't spoken to me since the trial. Vanessa sent one text, "Hope you're happy." I didn't respond. 3 months later, she sent another. "Mom had a stroke, thought you should know." I sent flowers to the hospital with a card that said, "Wishing you a full recovery." My mother never acknowledged them. 6 months after the trial, my father reached out through his assistant. He wanted to have lunch. Neutral territory, no lawyers, just talk. I almost said no, but curiosity won. We met at a quiet restaurant in Cambridge. He arrived first, looking older than I remembered. Grayer, smaller somehow, without his power suits and his dismissive confidence. "Claire, thank you for coming." We ordered, made small talk about weather and traffic. Then, over appetizers neither of us touched, he said what he came to say. "Your mother and I are divorcing." I set down my water glass carefully. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. It's been coming for years. Turns out when your whole relationship is built on projecting success and that image cracks, there's nothing underneath." He smiled, bitter. The stroke was mild, but it scared her, made her think about mortality. She started questioning everything, including me. "Dad," let me finish. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. For every time I made you feel less than. Every time I compared you to your siblings, like you were a quarterly earnings report that didn't meet projections. Every time I didn't see you." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. This was what I'd wanted my whole life. Recognition, acknowledgement, an apology. Your grandmother tried to tell me. She said I was raising winners instead of children, that I'd lost sight of what mattered. I told her she was getting sentimental in her old age. He laughed, hollow. Turns out she was the only one seeing clearly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to hear it. And because Marcus asked me to." That surprised me. "Marcus?" "He's struggling. The sanctions hit hard. His firm is pushing him out because he brought them bad publicity over a family dispute. His marriage is rocky because Jen finally realized he's exactly like me. And he's in therapy, if you can believe it, trying to figure out how he became someone who'd destroy his little sister over money." My father reached across the table, stopped just short of touching my hand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that someday. Maybe we could try again. Differently this time. As real people instead of roles we're all tired of playing. I looked at this man who'd spent my whole life making me feel invisible, now sitting across from me stripped of all his armor, asking for a second chance. I don't know if I can do that yet, Dad. The wound is still too fresh. I understand. I'll wait, however long it takes. He stood up, pulled out his wallet to pay for lunch we hadn't eaten. Your grandmother would be proud of you. I'm proud of you too, even if I failed to show it when it mattered. You fought like hell for yourself. That's what she wanted to teach you all along. After he left, I sat in that restaurant for another hour, processing everything. Part of me wanted to hate him forever, to hold on to the anger that had fueled me through the court battle. But another part, the part that Grandma Dot had nurtured, understood that holding on to hate would make me as small as they'd tried to make me. I wasn't ready to reconcile. Maybe I never would be. But I wasn't closing the door completely either. That was growth, I suppose. Learning that you can protect yourself without becoming hard, that you can win without becoming cruel. Marcus and I have a strange, silent understanding now. We passed each other at a coffee shop 2 months ago. He nodded. I nodded back. Neither of us said a word. I think he finally sees me, even if he'll never admit I deserve to win. Last week, I hired my first employee. Her name is Sarah. She's 58, and she's starting her own business after 20 years in a corporate job that laid her off without warnings. She sat in my office in Grandma Dot's house and told me she felt invisible. I smiled. I know exactly what you mean. The money changed my life, yes. The security, the freedom, the opportunities. But what really changed everything was fighting for myself when no one else would. Standing in that courtroom alone and refusing to be small. Honoring my grandmother's belief in me by believing in myself. Some nights I still watch that video. Grandma Dot looking into the camera, telling me to fight. And I think about how the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift, the element of surprise. My family rolled their eyes when I walked into that courtroom because they'd spent my whole life teaching me I didn't matter. But I learned something they never expected. The invisible ones see everything. And when we finally step into the light, we're blinding. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and patient, built on Sunday afternoons and sealed letters and one woman's absolute certainty that love means seeing someone clearly, even when the world refuses to look.